Welcome to the Daily Plunge. We're in Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. We're in chapter 7, starting at verse 2 through verse 16. Paul starts by saying, make room for us in your heart. Now, he's talking to a group of folks that he's having some conflict with, and he says, make room for us in your heart. He says, we wronged no one, corrupted no one, exploited no one. And I don't say this to condemn you, but we want you to know, he's telling these Christians, this church community, he says that you have such a place in our hearts. We're so committed to you. We're committed to live with you or to die with you for the sake of the gospel. And he says, we have spoken straight with you. We've been straightforward with you. And we take pride in you. We are celebrating what God is doing in you. And he goes on in verse 5, he says, when we were on our missionary trip, in all our troubles, God comforted us. And we went through all kinds of conflicts within and without, but God kept leading us forward. And part of that was that Titus had told them about how the people in Corinth were concerned about them. And he said, your deep sorrow and your ardent concern gave us great joy. It empowered us. Now, this sorrow is because Paul has had to sort of take them to task for being Christians, or really for not walking the walk as Jesus would have them. And so he's been challenging them, and they don't like it, and it has caused them some sorrow. And Paul makes the point, I did this because I want to see you grow in the faith. And he says, godly sorrow is the work of the Holy Spirit to bring you to salvation and to grow you in being sanctified or growing closer to God. He says, worldly sorrow leads to regret and ultimately death. And so I want to ask you, when in your walk of faith have you experienced godly sorrow because someone challenged you about whether you were walking in the ways of God? Now, Paul goes on to say is that godly sorrow produces earnestness, that you're more sincere. It produces an eagerness to clear yourself of that problem, of that sin. It says that it produces a holy indignation. It produces indignation, which is about, being disgusted by the sin and the evil of this world rather than reveling in it. It produces alarm, which is, again, sort of being watchful, like God calls his people to be watchful. And it says a longing to be with our leaders and with other Christians, concern for one another, and a readiness. Again, which Jesus calls us to be ready. And all of this, Paul says that they could see themselves, not in where they were failing, but they could see how much God was already doing. And he goes on to sort of finish this out in the last verses. He says, in addition to our own encouragement, we were especially delighted to hear how happy Titus was, because he was telling us all the wonderful things that God is doing amongst you. So there's a place for godly sorrow in your life to help produce the joy of faith. Have a blessed day.